Sundays have really become an odd day in Diablo Immortal for a lot of players. And what I mean by that is, well, if you've been farming throughout the week and you're fairly active, at this point, I myself am 13 levels over server paragon, and I have 10% experience. So there isn't much incentive for me to farm in regards to trying to gain additional levels. Now, if I'm open world farming, there's not that much incentive either because of the way that the combat rating now works on gear. Every time I gain a paragon level, the maximum combat rating that a piece can roll can increase by 2. Now the chances of even getting that maximum roll are slim, but this means that I probably haven't gained many levels today over the previous day or perhaps even the last few days. So in terms of farming and getting the most of your time, it's actually better to do your farming fairly early on in the week and using strategies like expending your battle pass when the server paragon level increases. Sorry, I'm trying to get down the portal and this bug still exists where I can't get in. But I saved my battle pass points, and I'll show you what I mean here is that I'm capped for the week, but I have not spent any of them. I'm just going to dump all of these tomorrow morning, get my level as high as I can so that when I farm early in the week, I have a better chance of getting quality gear early on in the week and kind of free to do other things as the week goes on, whether I want to run my towers for the daily rewards, run dungeons for things that aren't affected by the server paragon level. And that leaves us with Sunday, right? There's no Rite of Exile on my server, so I don't have that to look forward to. There's no shadow assembly, so there's nothing to log on in that time frame at all. The tower battles don't occur today. The shadow wars don't occur today. So there's really not a whole lot going on in the game. Now, if you're on a server that the cycle is resetting, a lot of players choose to use this opportunity to participate in battlegrounds with a higher faction buff and take advantage of that. What I'm doing personally is going through the last set of hidden layers that I need and just acquiring the remainder of the normal gems that I can, because I figure, why not? I shouldn't leave them out on the table for the week, especially since I have nothing else to really do at this time. Makes sense to at least kind of do something productive. But after that, I don't have a whole lot of options. I can basically sit in the Trial of the Hordes queue, or I can sit and spam Cavern of Echoes over and over again, which I have done basically for the last 3 days since I've been high enough level for it to just be so inefficient to do anything else. So the options have become kind of limited, aside from knocking out your dailies and basically being done. If you're not in that situation, like I mentioned, where you have a max faction buff, you mainly want to avoid the battlegrounds, right? For example, if you're sitting at a first week of a cycle reset, you don't want to go into the battlegrounds where almost every other player has a max faction buff. So it just kind of limits your options in general. And with the other things we have, continuing to spam dungeons or sitting in this Trial of the Hordes queue, which I desperately hope gets some more changes. In fact, what I'm hoping for is some kind of consolidation for the ranking system. I just feel like players are wasting more time in the queue than they are actually playing. And it's just really amplified by it being a Sunday for me personally, because like I'm saying, there isn't much benefit to farming. So if I'm going to go sit in that queue for 30 plus minutes and get nothing from farming, I just feel like my time is really not worth it. And that's unfortunate because the mode itself is actually somewhat enjoyable in my opinion. However, sitting in a queue for that long and doing the same exact thing over and over is less enjoyable. So definitely looking for some more changes, hopefully, if not this time, but the next time that event rolls around. Now, I also want to talk about the PvP meta because I haven't touched upon this in a while now. What do I think the strongest class in PvP currently is? Well, I think it's Necro, all right? And Necro, just the borrow time has kind of amplified this and made them even stronger. On defense, they can essentially get a Wraith form off and just work their way into the objective. And from there, they can use Fear Skulls for the Bone Spirits, CC targets. They can take damage, drop down in borrow time, similar to like a Barbarian with Undying Rage, and just occupy that, stall that objective, and when they come out of that borrowed time, it's possible for them to get another Wraith form off. Now we're starting to see some builds and classes get utilized that kind of counter the borrowed time, set up to CC them again, and just lock them up so that they can't get away and so forth. And I suspect that we'll see more of those. What's interesting about that is Necro is still hard countered by the majority of monk builds, so not much has changed there. You'll still get some very high resonance players that are going to be willing to play monk just because it counters so many of the other players that might be on Necro. Some of these monk builds, and I haven't shared all of the monk builds because I haven't been covering the class, but I may get some video from a friend of mine and cover that as well. But there are some monk builds that also counter wizard, and wizards are kind of the next best thing at the moment because they can do so much damage while invisible. They've got the stun from the stance change, and most of their damage is just AoE non-targeted damage, meaning as you can see my screen, things are just flying around, and when my cooldowns come up, I'll do it again just so that you can take a look at that if you weren't paying attention. So I just hit my buttons and I can run around like this. I don't have to target anything, right? My damage is just going to be applied to everything around me. And on top of that, using a PvP build, I can actually go invisible and teleport, so you can sneak up a little bit, ambush people with this large AoE damage, wipe groups out, even if you're lower resonance than other players. So there's a lot of things to be said there. And when the monks then also have an option of a build that counters the wizards as well, that kind of makes them appealing. However, monks still suffers from an issue that it had when Shimmerlin was part of the meta, and that's that they really struggle to win on attack. And with so many of these matches having, even though they've kind of been optimized, what this does is place a lot of these high resonance players on attack and the slightly lower resonance players on defense. So if the highest resonance player is a monk on attack, they're still struggling. So the win rates aren't really being reflected in the same way that, say, Necro's win rate is being reflected at the leaderboards. And this may vary depending on your individual server. But for the most part, if you take a look at your leaderboards and the highest resonance players, you'll see that Necros are probably somewhat out in front of the other classes for the most part in terms of win rate. And that's just kind of shows an issue that Necros have been the strongest or the second strongest class for the entirety of the game, right? They most likely did not even need this borrowed time skill. It seems to be definitely overkill, and we have seen or heard nothing about this being altered or nerfed or anything at this point. So we'll be curious to see how that kind of plays out as well. What we do have this month is Shadow Knight, and that will certainly shake up the meta for sure. So this will all be changing most likely. I imagine Shadow Knight will be incredibly strong. And another thing that I have found very surprising is the lack of frontline. And what I mean by that is barbarians and crusaders in the battleground. It seems like they're sometimes just not even there. I can play a match and have no crusader or barb on either side, and neither class is really in a terrible spot. So I find this very interesting that the other classes are actually so powerful that nobody even wants to play something that's still somewhat good, because if you aren't on the strongest or one of the strongest, you just feel like you're hindered. And I always like to mention these things in these metas because they do trickle down into other resonance players as well, and it certainly affects things down the line. So even if you aren't playing directly in these matches, you'll see a lot of these changes and things just occurring in your normal bracket, and perhaps your matches might have seemed, in general, just pretty poor. And I don't mean that there aren't good players in them, or I don't mean that the people queuing aren't playing the match or participating or anything like that. What I mean by poor is that they're just very lopsided, right? On top of the lag and the rubber banding that we've had, the matches can be incredibly lopsided just based on the composition that you have. If you get 2 Necros, 2 Wizards, 2 Monks, 2 Demon Hunters, and the other team has got 2 Barbs, 2 Crusaders, well, your team almost certainly loses because the opponent's team with the 2 Barbs and 2 Crusaders can hold the front line and allow the damage dealers to really do their job in a much better fashion than the 8 damage dealers can just kind of run forward. So this has just been a really interesting few weeks, honestly, for the meta here, because there's so much damage on either side, and it seems like if either team is able to just win the luck of the draw and get some frontline, that they have a huge advantage. But despite that, there aren't many people swapping over to frontline classes, and that has really kind of been surprising to me. But perhaps this is because so many people know Shadow Knight is coming, and they're just holding up for that rather than doing an additional swap in the meantime. So I hope this information helps you. Until then, as always, thanks for taking the time to watch, and have a great day.